Yeah, that's the difficulty that I have with religion as a non-religious guy. It's like there's all these different religions, and each one of them is convinced that theirs is the right one,
Mhm.
right? And then you know the the interesting part when you start diving into them and you have conversation. I've talked to Muslims, Jews, Christians, Catholics. I've got friends in all sector, but they all deal with the same problems with women. That
Yes,
the
yes.
truth that the red pill brings that unplugs them from the lies solves actually, which is interesting.
Mhm.
I wanted to focus mostly on religion and marriage on this show. So,
Cool.
marriage. You've been married for a long time. I've been
Mhm.
divorced. I mean, you talk about it in your book in great length, but
Mhm.
TLDR, marriage, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea for guys today? Does religion provide a buffer or an insulator, an insurance policy to divorce? Like, what are your thoughts on
I
marriage
think
as
in
a
some
whole?
ways it does. And again, I think this is more of a generational thing than anything else. Um, I think there's almost like a false sense of security, at least from the research and the guys that I talk to. And you have to remember, I took me 3 years to write the book, but it's really been in the works for almost like 10 or 11 years since we started talking about this stuff and having this back and forth. But I think that there's this false sense of security on the part of guys thinking that, well, I'm gonna buck the trend, right? They can't ignore, and this is really the part that I think a lot of like sort of pastors and stuff have a tough time with, is they can't ignore the data. They
Hmm.
can't ignore divorce stats. They can't ignore the fact that marriage in Western society, certainly in the United States, I would presume Canada as well, is an unconscionable contract. I mentioned that in the book as well. And
Yes.
an unconscionable contract is a contract you would never enter into unless you had a gun to your head, or you, like, if you read the stipulations of the contract, you would be like, no sane person would put their name on this contract. And really, since the sexual revolution, that's what the marriage contract has become in a legal sense. Now, what religious people try, well, more, and I'm by religious, I mean like all religions here. What religious people believe is that they're going to buck the trend because God's on their side. And God said, go get married. God said, no sex before marriage. And the only way you can get sex is to get married. And the state says, okay, you have to sign the unconscionable contract and you'll get that. And if you have this religious belief that says, okay, I'm insured by God that things are going to work out and I'm not going to be a statistic, then guys will jump in with both feet, and they'll be pissed off if you tell them, hey, do you not see what this is all about? So there's a separation, I think, between like church and state when it comes to marriage right now. And what happens is guys will say, well, I have a covenant marriage. I have my marriage is more than just a piece of paper. It's about between me, my wife, and God, right?
Hmm.
And I had this debate one time on Pat Campbell's show back in the day with Dr. Everett Piper. And it was like, I took the against marriage position and he took the pro marriage position. If you know who Dr. Everett Piper is, he's a very much a religious pundit kind of guy.
Hmm.
He was I think he was a provost or the principal or something of Wesleyan University in Oklahoma. And so we had this back and forth. Now, I'm not against marriage, clearly. I mean, I've been married for 25 years. I'm against marriage the way we do it now, right? I'm against the institution as far as the mechanics and the machine that marriage has become. As a concept, I think marriage is fantastic, but I think the way we do it right now is the worst risk that a man can take. And so I took that position, and I had all the stats on my side, and I had all this data, and that you're clearly aware of because you have these conversations all the time.
Hmm.
And so I'm explaining this to him, and it's, again, he thinks, well, couldn't happen. Can't happen here, right? Can't happen to me because I'm of this religion, and if I have a woman who is of the same religion, then I don't have to worry about divorce. And maybe that's true to an extent. But the problem that you always have is that she always has the leverage. There's always, because the state will always come down on her side unless she's like criminally insane or she's a chronic drug addict or something like that. So when you mix sort of what I call the covenant marriage with the sort of contract marriage, what guys believe is that the worst aspects of the contract of marriage is going to be offset by the fact that they have this covenant with their wife. And that goes into sort of blue pill beliefs. It also goes into their religious beliefs as well. And to acknowledge that the possibility might exist that she might actually use the contract and the state against him goes not only against his own ego invested beliefs, but it also goes against his beliefs in his religion.
Hmm.
Because if that guy gets divorced, now it's not just a crisis of him, losing his idealism about marriage. It's also an existential crisis about his belief set, about what, his belief in God and what God was supposed to do for him. And here he is, he's divorced and he's lost his kids.
Yeah. Guys love comforting lies, man. They if you tell them, hey, women are solipsistic, well, what does that mean? You explain it to them. Well, I don't want to believe that because I believe in God, and God's greater than all of that, right?
Right. And it causes I think even just contemplating it is something that is really disconcerting for guys who are really true, genuine believers in this stuff, because you can't, the stats are unignorable.
Well, I have an entire chapter in my book. I know you've gone through it. The title of the chapter is Why Smart Men Don't Marry. And there's not a lot of in there that's that different than what you've concluded yourself, right? There's a lot of things that I break down as to why, obviously, but like you said, it's an unconscionable contract. It's like, if we were business partners and you shoved a piece of paper across the table and you said, hey, Rich, I want you to sign this because we're going to enter a business with the same terms in our marriage contract. I wouldn't sign it. I tell you to get lost.
You wouldn't sign it, but then you would say, well, my God says I should sign this. My God says, like, damn the torpedoes.
That's the difference. Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah. And that's a hard place to be too, because I think a lot of guys they ended up, getting railroaded. And then once they get into the church situation and they realize that they don't have the same social network that their wife does. I hate to bring the name up, but George Bruno went through exactly the same thing. Like when he got divorced, I had the conversation with him on that show. That's exactly what happened to him and I don't know if he came back to religion or not. I'm not really sure. I don't really care. But at that time, he explained to me this. He said, she had all of the pre-established network there. And I was, even the pastor who I thought was on my side was, didn't know me, didn't care.
So, question for you: why is premarital sex forbidden before marriage?
Is
that with all religions, or is it just with?
I can't. I do know that it is with patriarchal religions, and I think you've already read Alpha God by Dr. Hector.
Great book.
Yeah. So when I included that aspect in my book, I was focusing primarily on the patriarchal Old Testament, like Abrahamic religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And those are very male, masculine-centric religions. That's not to say that there aren't others, but those are the ones we know the best, particularly in Western cultures. So that's what I focused on there. And when I was covering that aspect in the book, as far as premarital sex is concerned, also, I paired that up with prearranged marriages too. A lot of people think that premarital sex is a bad idea, and who would buy a car without test driving it first? And there's that pragmatic kind of deductive male logic, which is true. But I think that when we look at stats, and we've covered this before, when we look at stats of women who have had multiple sex partners prior to getting married, and we focus ourselves on the aspect of women's notch count and how it relates to their self-reported, by the way, happiness, divorce, incidents of divorce, and you look at all the downsides of having a woman who has had, more than, let's say, 7 partners in her life. The stats don't lie. Those, again, once again, here we have the numbers. I understand now the function of a religion of some, spiritual belief that says no sex before marriage. And the reason for that primarily is to ensure paternity of the husband who actually marries that woman, and then therefore he knows that the child is his. That was really the beginning of that proscription in the Old Testament, in Islam, in Christianity, and I'm sure there's probably several others, that the woman is to be a virgin. That's the whole thing about, Jesus Christ, born of a virgin, right? We know the lineage, we know the parentage in that case, or like that's to that point of metaphysical, that whole side of Christianity anyways. So that really is reflective, I think, of the patriarchal religion where you have the alpha male who is the alpha god, right? From the book Alpha God. So you have this religious mythology, let's just say, that surrounds the idea that it's best to find your virgin bride because that's the way that you know she's untainted. If the kid's going to be yours, and that's the most important thing that there is. So that explains that side of it. And then when you look at like I don't think that premarital sex today in the 21st century, actually since the 20th century, really has been a real tenable thing for human beings. But I do understand the latent function of no sex before marriage. I want a woman, like when you look at women who were virgins when they got married, they all report, higher incidences of marital happiness, and they like where they're at because they've only ever had one guy. And that's the one guy in their life who they had sex with. That's definitely their alpha because they haven't experienced anybody else.
Yeah, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find yourself a virgin today, and
very much so.
Like large urban coastal cities. I mean,
but
one thing that was really
what's the latent function of it, right? It's to ensure paternity.